Coming to you from the mountains and the plain. The only conservative voices brave enough to push back. This is the Conservative Daily Podcast with Joe Otto.
That's what the Second Amendment was designed to do. If you're going to do something to nullify or take away my rights under the Constitution, come get it.
Max McGuire.
When you look at politicians on the left, they need to convince people that they are victims.
A resistance to the resistance. And now your hosts, Joe Otto and Max McGuire.
And welcome back to another edition of the Conservative Daily Podcast. My name is Max McGuire. Joe Otto is out today. He has a business meeting, so he has to be out today. So I thought today we would talk about how all of the Democrats are rapists, child molesters, and racists. No, I won't do that to him. We'll wait for when he's back to talk about that topic. But today we're going to be talking about Democrats and how Democrats are, or at least they seem to be, a motley bunch of criminals. We're going to be talking about just what we've learned in the last couple of days about all of the Democrats at all levels within the party. We're talking about grassroots, and we're also talking all the way up to the presidential candidate himself, Joe Biden, his son, Michael Bloomberg. We learned that John Durham actually convinced a grand jury to issue a subpoena to the Clinton Foundation. Bloomberg was caught buying votes. ANTIFA caught trafficking riot gear into Louisville. And Hunter Biden got paid by Russians, and Joe Biden lied about being briefed on it. So we're going to be covering all this. Big episode. I figured instead of just talking about one of the criminals, we'll talk about all of them that we learned about in the last 24 to 48 hours. So I need you to hit that share button if you're on Facebook, like the video and comment. And on YouTube, make sure you give us a thumbs up. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, the bell for notifications, and leave a comment as well. So let's dive right into it. As we covered it towards the end of yesterday, that Michael Bloomberg is trying to buy the Florida election. Now, Donald Trump won Florida in 2016, I believe, by a little bit more than 100,000 votes. So it's predicted to be a thin margin, right? Michael Bloomberg is attempting to make up that margin, and Donald Trump is ahead in Florida. He's trying to make it up by buying the votes of felons. We talked about this a little bit towards the end of yesterday's show because we had a caller who was talking about it. But I wanted to devote more time to talking about this. So Florida, the state of Florida, actually passed a constitutional amendment giving felons back their right to vote. The state legislature, though, passed a law that says, okay, they'll get their right to vote back after they've finished their sentence. And that sentence isn't just jail time. It also includes all their fines and all their restitution. And we had Richard on the phone yesterday. It was a great caller. What I tried to explain yesterday is I think that's completely fair. I think that it should have been put forward that way from the beginning, but I think it's completely fair to say that in order for a felon to get their right to vote back, they have to pay their entire debt to society, not just their time behind bars, but also any monetary fines or restitution as part of their sentence. And yes, I believe including parole, any part of your sentence whatsoever. And after that, I believe that every felon should get every single one of their rights back. If you've served your debt to society, yes, I include the Second Amendment. Now, we can have discussions about people who are mass murderers. Maybe it's not a good idea to give them their guns back. But I do think, by and large, if you've committed a felony and you've paid your debt to society entirely, then the government has no legitimate right to abuse and violate your rights any longer. So that's what's happening in Florida. They've decided that you need to not only have served your jail sentence, but also have paid back your fines and restitution. So a lot of people can't do that, understandably. If you've been fined thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, you can't just come up with that money in time to vote. So Michael Bloomberg put together a bunch of money. I think it was like $16 million to pay off the fines of 32,000 Florida felons. And unapologetically, he and his advisors and his associates admitted that they were doing this because they knew that the people they'd be paying off have a high likelihood of voting for Joe Biden. So unapologetically, they're trying to influence the November election. That's illegal. That is against the law. And before we go into any of it, let's go ahead and put up image 2. I like to do this. I like to actually talk about what the laws are. This is Florida Statute Title 9, Chapter 104, Section 61, Subsection 2. And it reads as follows. No person shall directly or indirectly give or promise anything of value to another, intending thereby to buy that person's or another's vote, or to corruptly influence that person or another in casting his or her vote. Any person who violates this subsection is guilty of a felony of the 3rd degree. And then it says that it does not apply to food that's being consumed at a political rally or anything of nominal value like a political advertisement, a campaign sign, or like anything like that. But beyond food, beyond campaign advertising, if you give anything of value to someone, either to directly or indirectly encourage or entice them to vote, that's a felony in the 3rd degree. Michael Bloomberg is committing 32,000 third-degree felonies. He's not just, he's shooting for the moon. He's not just going for 1 or 2. He's going for 32,000. I mean, I'll look it up real quick, but that is a massive jail sentence. A massive jail sentence. He doesn't care. He thinks he can get away with it. And that's what's so amazing about this. That it's obvious that this, okay, so a 3rd-degree felony, I just wanted to make sure I got it right. A 3rd-degree felony is a felony that's punishable by up to 5 years in prison. So, quick little math. 32,000 times 5, and you get 160,000 years. You take all those felonies, whether it's 30, 31, 32,000, you add them up. If it's 32,000 that he's paying off, that's a maximum prison penalty. According to the Florida statutes, a 3rd-degree felony is up to 5 years. That's a maximum prison sentence for those 32,000 felonies. The maximum combined prison sentence would be, apparently, 160,000 years behind bars. Now, if you or I did this, even just once, we'd be arrested. But he thinks that he can overload it by just paying off all of them. Really, really amazing. Now, I want to put this up because let's go ahead and put up image 1. Nikki Fried, Fried, I don't know how you pronounce her name. She is the only Democrat elected to statewide office in Florida at the moment. She is the Florida Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services. But if you looked at her Twitter, you wouldn't think that because she's talking about everything. She's using her voice in Florida government to talk about a lot of issues that she's not actually elected to do anything about. So here is a tweet where she says, and it was tweeted out on September 22nd, "Thank you, Mike Bloomberg. This will go a long ways to fighting voter suppression in Florida." And she links a Washington Post article about Bloomberg raising $16 million to help former felons vote in Florida. So here you have an elected official actually encouraging not only Mike Bloomberg to do this, but as you interpret it, she's encouraging others, right? So then you start talking about, is this elected official an accomplice in this? No, she's not actually part of the conspiracy, but she's absolutely encouraging it. And that's the only Democrat elected to statewide office. She's encouraging a billionaire and congratulating him and thanking him for committing 32,000 third-degree felonies. But it didn't take long. It didn't take long for the GOP to say, whoa, you can't do this. And Congressman Matt Gaetz was the first out of the gate. Let's go ahead and play cut 1.
I will be calling on the Florida Attorney General to launch an investigation into Mike Bloomberg for potentially engaging in bribery and vote buying in the state of Florida. Here's how that works, Lou. In Florida, you only get to vote if you're a convicted felon, if all of your court costs, fines, fees, and restitution are paid off. And so what Michael Bloomberg is doing is creating a politically motivated way to retire the debts of these felons in exchange for their votes. And it's not every felon, it's just those which they have specifically identified as the Biden voters. And so again, that's offering a bribe, an inducement for someone to behave a certain way in voting. I think it's potentially criminal. It's probably the worst waste of money for Michael Bloomberg since he was a failed presidential candidate.
So I think that Congressman Gaetz hits the nail on the head because he mentions that it isn't just picking people at random and saying, okay, we're going to just pay off a random amount of felons, pay off their debts to society so that they can vote. It's not random at all. It's targeted. It's specific specifically targeted to the people that Bloomberg and his associates believe would be most likely to vote for Joe Biden, which is why that Florida statute comes into play, because there is no way around it. If you are paying off someone's debt, that is absolutely something of monetary value because it alleviates their debt, right? Instead of having to pay down their debt to society, they're allowed to do other things with their income. So it's absolutely something of monetary value. The question is whether or not you can prove that it's done to entice them to vote. Obviously, if someone's paying off their debt because you want them to vote, then you're enticing them to vote. I mean, it's obvious. But the fact that they're actually admitting that they're targeting specific people because they believe they'd be more likely to vote for Joe Biden, that adds a whole other level to it. It's obviously political. It's obviously with an intent to have them vote a certain way. So obviously it's criminal. So Congressman Matt Gaetz, he recommended, and he actually called the Florida Attorney General, and she picked up the phone, and she agreed with him. Here's Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody. Let's play cut 2.
There are a number of felons, and apparently, I don't know where the number 16 million came up, but he now is offering to pay the fines, the restitution, etc. You think that could violate election law, and so you have called for an investigation.
You know, look, we have to have trust in our elections process. It's essential to a strong, stable democracy. And so when you hear words like targeting certain voters, investing and adding to a particular column, that doesn't matter what party it is, that triggers Florida law, which under Florida law, you cannot directly or indirectly give anything of value to persuade or entice a vote. Mm-hmm. And so as Attorney General, and I believe any official charged with enforcing elections law, we have to be clear about what we're doing, which is why when I asked for further investigation, I attached all the relevant law, even opinions that describe if you target even particular voters that may be predisposed to vote a particular way, that may be illegal. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Americans can judge for themselves. They need to know that those that are in charge of the elections investigations are on it. I am hopeful that the FBI also takes notice. I directed them also to consider federal law. Americans need to know that no stone will be left unturned and investigations will proceed so that they can trust in these elections.
I have heard some people suggest that Michael Bloomberg is just simply trying to buy votes down in Florida, but there's no guarantee that these people would vote for any particular candidate.
So, interesting. This is one of the first times I've actually seen Ashley Moody talk. I've seen it a couple times. She seems like she's got a good head on her shoulders. I'm a little bit dismayed because the language that came out, obviously she's ordered the investigation, but the language that she used where she forwarded this to the other authorities, it sounds much more suggestive. Like when Democrats want to investigate Trump, the Attorney General just does it. They don't have to send letters to other attorneys under them to basically recommend that they do it. They just do it. They launch the investigation. I like that she's recommending that the FBI get involved, but I am a little concerned because we've seen this kicking of the can up the chain of command. We saw Gaetz kick it up to the Attorney General, which he has to do. He's a member of Congress. He can't investigate anyone. Then we saw the Attorney General almost seemingly kicking the can to the FBI. It's obvious, folks. Whether or not the cash has actually hit the bank accounts of the felons, this is a criminal conspiracy to influence an election, right? It's not just necessarily the act of committing it. There are also laws on the book that make it a crime to conspire to commit a crime, right? Even if you don't go through with it, the conspiracy itself is criminal. So it seems pretty obvious that this is criminal, but because it's Michael Bloomberg, because he's a billionaire, he's not in handcuffs yet. If it was you or I doing this, we'd already be in jail. We would absolutely already be in jail. Carl's asking, is it a state or federal offense? Well, I just put up the state statute. We can put it up again. Let's go ahead and put that up one more time, Mr. Producer, image 2. That's the state statute, which makes it a crime to directly or indirectly give or promise anything of value to another, intending thereby to buy that person's or another person's vote, or to corruptly influence that person or another person in casting his vote. So the way it's written, it's two possibilities. Not only buying that vote, but to corruptly influence that person in casting their vote. So you don't even need to convince them to vote one way or another. It's just the act of corruptly trying to influence someone into casting their vote. It doesn't actually have to be a promise to vote for one candidate or the other. The fact that he's paying off their debts specifically to get them to vote. Hope that answers your question, Carl. But there are other federal laws that come into play where you can't buy votes too, but that's up to the FBI and the DOJ. So that's the first crime that we learned about in the past 48 hours. Michael Bloomberg committing 32,000 felonies, at least, of which, if he was prosecuted for all of them to the fullest extent of Florida law, each third-degree felony is punishable by up to 5 years in prison. So combined, that would be up to 160,000 years in jail. Like, this is massive, folks. It's like when we talked about the Mueller team and the crimes they had committed. Like the lying to the FISA court, right? The destroying of the phones, the destroying of the documents on their phones, the government records, mishandling of classified information, right? Lying to the FISA court, lying to investigators, violating people's rights under color of law. You add up all those different crimes, and you're talking about hundreds of years, thousands of years potentially combined in prison sentences. When Democrats commit crimes, they don't just do one-offs. They go for it all, and they hope that you're not going to catch them. And even if you do, they hope that their wealth and their status will help them get off. So that's the first crime that we wanted to go through today. Michael Bloomberg very obviously breaking the law. Another thing happened yesterday, which was the Senate, the Senate Government Affairs and Finance committees released their interim report on Hunter and Joe Biden's actions in Ukraine. Now, this is interim. The investigation is not over, but they wanted to make sure that we were able to at least see their findings. And it's actually pretty shocking. I wanted, though, before we get into this, I want to just play this. It was a while ago. Joe Biden was asked by Axios whether he had any knowledge about his son and what he was doing in Ukraine. And I just want to make sure that we get this out before we talk about this, because it's going to be proven to be a complete lie. Joe Biden said he was never informed. He had no idea. Let's go ahead and play Cut 3.
To serve on the board of a Ukrainian energy company facing serious corruption charges, you were the vice president running point on Ukraine. The average Joe hears that and says, that sounds fishy. What's your understanding of what your son was doing for an extraordinary amount of money?
I don't know what he was doing. I know he was on the board. I found out he was on the board after he was on the board, and that was it. And there's nobody...
Well, you've had a lot of time. Isn't this something you want to get to the bottom of?
No, because I trust my son.
But that doesn't pass the smell test. Like, when you're vice president, isn't there a higher standard? Don't you need to know what's happening with your family? Don't you need to put down some guardrails?
Unless there was something that was... there was something on its face that was wrong. There's nothing on its face that was wrong. So look, if you want to talk about problems, let's talk about Trump's family. I mean, come on. This is... These guys are amazing.
So you think that everything that happened was kosher?
You know there's not one single bit of evidence, not one little tiny bit, to suggest anything done was wrong. You know that, but you keep asking me these questions. It's okay. You're doing what you have to do, but I'm not worried about it. Look, the American public knows me.
Last one on this. Say you're elected, you're in office. What guardrails would you have to be sure that your son, your brother Jimmy, doesn't do anything to trade on the family name?
They will not be engaged in any foreign business because of what's happened in this administration. No one's going to be seeking patents for things from China. No one's going to be engaged in that kind of thing.
So no foreign business for your relatives in office?
I mean, cut it there. So that last bit, I have to talk about the last bit because he's like, no one under my administration would be seeking a patent. What he's talking about is he's talking about Ivanka Trump. She has a fashion line and she has like a women's fragrance line that she wanted to get patents for in China. So we're talking about like the design for clothes and jewelry and the proprietary makeup of perfumes. Like that's what she applied for China. There's not some grand conspiracy to make Ivanka Trump get rich by selling perfume in China. That's just when you have a new perfume, you apply for a patent everywhere, right? When you have a new clothing line or new jewelry line, you apply for it everywhere. So he's trying to, it's amazing how he does this. And you saw he got aggravated at that reporter. He's like, oh, come on, man. He loves to say that, but he says, you're unbelievable. And he's trying to make it out like this is not a question you're allowed to ask. But I found it very interesting because he said he didn't know anything about Hunter Biden's stuff, and he only learned that he was on the board after. But what we see from this interim report that was just released by the GOP in the Senate, we know that that is a lie. Let's go ahead and put up my screen, Mr. Producer. So we can see here, this is a part of the report, and it says in February of 2015, Kent, who is the individual, was still acting deputy chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. He raised concerns about the perception of a conflict of interest regarding Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board. So he says, Kent stated, quote, soon after that, in a briefing call with the National Security Staff and the Office of Vice President on other matters in February 2015, I raised my concern that Hunter Biden's status as a board member would create the perception of a conflict of interest. Kent continued, I said that I had learned that Hunter Biden had been appointed to a board of this company, that I had just raised U.S. concerns about the owner of the company, who we believed had been engaged in money laundering. The bottom line was, I said I believe that this creates the perception of a potential conflict of interest given Vice President Biden's role and his very strong advocacy for anti-corruption action, and that I thought that someone needed to talk to Hunter Biden and he should step down from the board of Burisma. He was then asked, do you remember who you talked to? He said, I don't remember honestly who I talked to, but I talked to someone. Never heard back from Vice President Biden's office. Go ahead and take that off the screen. We do know from this report that Biden was notified about his son because Biden then told his son, and Biden's son then contacted State Department officials asking for a meeting to talk about it. When the State Department briefs the vice president about a concern they have, and then the vice president's son calls them to set up a meeting, you can see that there's a link. The State Department didn't reach out to Hunter Biden. They reached out to the vice president. The fact that Hunter Biden called them says that the vice president, or at least his office, called Hunter, let him know what was going on so that he could get on top of it. Joe Biden lied. Joe Biden was briefed about the concerns the State Department had over his son's activity in Ukraine, and he did nothing about it. No, actually, that's not true. He didn't do nothing. He actually intervened to protect his son from being prosecuted by a Ukrainian prosecutor. Intervened to get that prosecutor fired because he was looking into Burisma, the company which we've just actually confirmed through this report, the company that that we know Biden was briefed about. So all this time he said, oh, well, when I wanted them to fire the prosecutor, it had nothing to do with my son, right? That's what they're claiming. He had nothing to do with his son. I didn't even know my son was on the board. I didn't even know they were investigating the company. Well, now we know that when he made that decision to basically threaten to withhold a U.S. aid promise to Ukraine unless Ukraine fired the prosecutor looking into Burisma, among other things, we know that at that moment, Joe Biden had been briefed that his son was on that board, and we know he had been briefed that it created a conflict of interest because the company was crooked. So we knew that he knew his son was involved in a crooked company, right? So it doesn't pass the smell test. And go ahead and leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know whether you think it passes the smell test, because I certainly don't. And make sure if you're on Facebook, hit that share button, hit the like button, comment on YouTube. I see you there commenting, Richard. Good to see you on the stream again. On YouTube, make sure you give us a thumbs up on the video. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. Really, really stunning stuff. So let's play a clip, because the only media outlets that are actually covering this, it's Fox. Let's cover this. This was from the night before the report was actually publicly released. Oh, no, actually, sorry, this was right after it was released. Let's go ahead and play cut 4.
Joe Biden's son, Hunter, is emerging as an issue in the presidential campaign. We're learning new information tonight about a Senate Republican investigation into the younger Biden. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel has details.
The 87-page report says in 2015, two senior State Department officials, George Kent and Amos Hochstein, raised concerns to Vice President Joe Biden's office and even with Biden personally about the perception of a conflict of interest regarding Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board. Quote, despite the efforts of these individuals, their concerns appear to have fallen on deaf ears. And warning of the risk of undermining U.S. policy in Ukraine, quote, officials within the Obama administration ignored the glaring warning signs when the vice president's son joined the board of a company owned by a corrupt Ukrainian oligarch. Senate Republican Chairman Ron Johnson and Chuck Grassley led the report, and no Treasury records show potential criminal activity relating to transactions among and between Hunter Biden, his family, his associates, and foreign nationals.
So I want to cover a little bit. Well, let's go ahead, Mr. Producer, put up my screen again. These are the key findings. These are the key findings from this interim report. And I'll read them briefly. I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read the first bits. In early 2015, the former acting deputy chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, George Kent, raised concerns to officials about Joe Biden's son, which we just talked about. In October 2015, senior State Department official Amos Hochstein raised concerns with Vice President Biden, directly with Vice President Biden, as well as with Hunter Biden, that Hunter Biden's position on Burisma's board enabled Russian disinformation efforts and risked undermining U.S. policies in Ukraine. So right there, in October of 2015, Joe Biden was briefed by a senior State Department official. Hunter Biden was briefed that they were concerned about this. Next, although Kent believed that Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board was awkward for all U.S. officials pushing anti-corruption agenda in Ukraine, the committees are only aware of two individuals, Kent and former U.S. Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Energy Affairs, Amos Hochstein, who raised concerns to Vice President Biden or his staff. The awkwardness for the Obama administration officials continued well past his presidency. Former Secretary of State John Kerry had knowledge of Hunter Biden's role on Burisma's board, but when asked about it at a town hall event in Nashua, New Hampshire on December 8th, 2019, Kerry falsely said, quote, I had no knowledge about any of that. None. No. End quote. That's true. John Kerry lied. Let's scroll down a little bit. Former Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, Victoria Nuland, testified that confronting oligarchs would send an anti-corruption message in Ukraine. So you can see that the State Department wanted to get after this. Hunter Biden was serving on Burisma's board, supposedly consulting on corporate governance and transparency, when Zlochevsky allegedly paid a $7 million bribe to officials serving under Ukraine's Prosecutor General Vitaly Yarema to, quote, shut the case against Zlochevsky. That's a mouthful. Kent testified that this bribe occurred in December 2014. Hunter Biden was a U.S. Secret Service protectee from January 29, 2009 to July 8, 2014. A day before his last trip as a protectee, Time published an article describing Burisma's ramped-up lobbying efforts to U.S. officials and Hunter's involvement in Burisma's board. So that's interesting. He ended his protective detail the day after Time, I guess Time magazine, published an article about his potential corruption. Let's put it back up. We gotta keep going down these. So we got more lying, more warning. This is where it gets really juicy. In addition to over $4 million paid by Burisma for Hunter Biden's and Archer's, that was one of his friends' memberships, Hunter Biden, his family, and Archer received millions of dollars from foreign nationals with questionable backgrounds. So Archer, we're not going to talk about him, but Hunter Biden received a $3.5 million wire transfer from Elena Baturina, the wife of the former mayor of Moscow. Hunter Biden opened a bank account with Gongwen Dong to fund a $100,000 global spending spree with James Biden and Sarah Biden. Well, let's go back. Let's take it off the screen. He also paid non-resident women who were nationals of Russia or other European countries who appear to be linked to an Eastern European prostitution or human trafficking ring. That's definitely a bit of news. But he received $3.5 million from the wife of the former mayor of Moscow. Does anyone believe in today's world you can become the mayor of Moscow without being on Putin's payroll? He received money from the wife of the former mayor of Moscow. That's about as entrenched in Russian politics as you can get. And he just received $3.5 million wire transfer. Really? And here Joe Biden saying, well, there's not a shred of evidence suggesting that anything my son did was wrong. Really? So he's just getting paid $3.5 million from the wife of the former mayor of Moscow. Obviously someone who's entrenched in Russian politics. to serve on a board in an energy company. He has no actual experience with energy matters at all. And when you go over to Ukraine, you demand that they fire the prosecutor looking into all of this. Otherwise, you withhold foreign aid to that country. Like, this is how crazy this gets. But I want to put this up because I don't know if any of you have small kids. I have a young son. He's really into Paw Patrol now. Paw Patrol, not going to get into a whole big thing about it. It's a bunch of pups, dogs that have like superpowers, and they all have different skills, and they fight crime, and they save the day. Whatever. There's a character, Chase. He's the police dog. Leftists hate Chase because they hate the police, and they hate him even though he's an imaginary police dog. They hate him. Like, the left hates Chase. Chase has this saying, and I know this because my son watches this all day long. Chase is on the case. And I thought about that when I saw this New York Times headline. Let's go ahead and put up image 3. This is straight from the New York Times, reporting on this new report from the Senate. Quote, headline, quote, Republican inquiry finds no evidence of wrongdoing by Biden. End quote. So when I saw that, I couldn't help but think of Paw Patrol, New York Times saying, don't worry, Democrats, we're on the case. That's the New York Times, how they editorialized this revelation that Hunter Biden was paid $3.5 million by the wife of the former mayor of Moscow in connection to his role on the board of an energy company in Ukraine when he had no actual experience with energy. This is how crazy this gets. Everyone, if you haven't already, hit that share button on Facebook, like the video, comment on YouTube. Make sure you give us a thumbs up. Media isn't covering this, so we have to. Make sure you give us a thumbs up. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers. At that point, we can monetize the channel. So please, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. It's crazy to me that we're just supposed to just ignore this. Let's play another clip because I thought this was from Lou Dobbs' show. I liked how he covered it. Let's go ahead and play cut 5.
Senators Ron Johnson and Chuck Grassley today published the report of their investigation into the Biden's connections to Ukrainian natural gas company Burisma. The report painting a clear picture. Hunter Biden's business dealings were concerning to U.S. officials. One of those officials warning that Hunter Biden's seat on Burisma's board of directors created a conflict of interest that could undermine the anti-corruption efforts of the Obama administration, led at the time by Joe Biden. American officials also flagged possible criminal acts linking Hunter Biden with possible ties to human and sex trafficking. The report saying, quote, Hunter Biden paid non-resident women who were nationals of Russia or other Eastern European countries and who appear to be linked to an Eastern European prostitution or human trafficking ring. But you wouldn't know about this activity from most of the left-wing media reports today. The Hill, for example, does not mention or describe the criminal behavior, nor does the New York Times, nor the Washington Post. The Wall Street Journal notes the report of potential criminal activity that it just does not mention the acts that are claimed.
So very interesting. I love Lou Dobbs calling out the media outlets by name. There was one reporter, and we played this briefly on the podcast yesterday, but there was one reporter yesterday who had the gall to ask Joe Biden this question, and it didn't go well. Joe Biden was not happy about being forced to answer a question about his son's obvious crimes overseas. Let's go ahead and play this. This is cut 6.
How is your role as vice president in charge of policy in Ukraine and your son's job in Ukraine? How is that not a conflict of interest?
It's not a conflict of interest. There's been no indication of any conflict of interest from Ukraine or anywhere else. Period. I'm not going to
pause it right there. We know that that's false. We know that that's absolutely false. Let me find it again in the document. Okay, go ahead and put up my screen again, Mr. Producer. He says that there's no shred of evidence that there's ever been any insinuation that there's a conflict of interest. And yet here we have from George Kent that he briefed Vice President Biden's office and said this represents a conflict of interest. We then know that another State Department official went to Joe Biden directly and said this represents a conflict of interest. And yet when Joe Biden's asked about it, he says, no, there's no evidence of a conflict of interest, even though 2 Obama administration officials went to him in his office and warned that, yes, this constitutes a conflict of interest. You can't be saying that you're fighting corruption in Ukraine while your son is on the board of directors for one of their most corrupt companies, taking bribes, taking payments from Russian oligarchs, right? Paying women who are connected to sex slavery and sex trafficking and prostitution overseas. You can't say that there's not a shred of evidence of conflict of interest when you were warned repeatedly by Obama administration officials. This wasn't a Republican attempt to smear him. These were Obama administration officials. Go ahead and take that off the screen, Mr. Producer, and let's go back and play the remainder of that clip. Just wanted to go in there and let you know he's lying.
Let's focus on the problem. Focus on this man, what he's doing, that no president has ever done. No president.
Amazing. I'm going to want to play that again because I did cut it up, and it's much better to listen to it or watch it in its entirety. But you see how Joe Biden gets angry. Like, no, how dare you? How dare you talk about this? How dare you even question about this? We should be talking about this man. And he gets angry and he starts pointing at reporters, ordering them to instead talk about Trump. Well, no, Joe, you said on camera, we played it just a couple minutes ago, you said that you did not know anything about your son on Burisma. And what the Senate found is not 1, but 2 Obama State Department officials briefed your office and, yes, Joe Biden himself, warning that this constitutes a conflict of interest and you can't be overseas promoting anti-corruption efforts while your son is knee-deep in corruption. And yet he's still pushing this lie. It's so easy. This is what makes me so furious. And again, I'm going to say, if you haven't already, hit that share button, like the video, comment on Facebook, give us a thumbs up, like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. What makes me so angry is it's so easy to put these pieces together. I mean, I spend a fair amount of time prepping these episodes. I mean, it's not easy. It takes time. It takes effort. But it isn't rocket science, right? It really isn't that hard to get the video of Joe Biden saying one thing and proving he was lying. Why isn't the mainstream media covering this? Fox is a little bit, right? They're actually telling you what is in the report. But as we just showed, the New York Times says, oh, they're just rehashing old findings, right? Other outlets are saying no evidence of criminality. Really? They're just providing cover for Biden. I mean, this is too easy to report to explain it any other way, right? There are reporters there who would love to have gotten this scoop, right? Proving that the vice president was alerted to his son's corruption in 2015 when you have him on camera in 2019. In 2019, 2020, saying that there was nothing there, no there. You would love that scoop. That's Pulitzer Prize worthy if you could scoop that. But they sit on their hands because the media isn't interested in reporting the truth. They're not actually interested in rooting out corruption. Whoever that reporter was, props to them. And we'll play it again in a second. Props to them for actually calling Joe Biden out and forcing him to get into that little angry rage. But notice that after that, the question stopped, right? A real reporter, having elicited that angry response from the vice president, would have pushed. And other reporters would have said, well, wait a minute, no. And they do this to Trump all the time, right? Remember when the Atlantic said that Trump called all deceased veterans losers? That press conference was every single one saying, why do you hate the troops? Why do you hate the troops? And the minute that Kayleigh McEnany went beyond it, someone else said, but no, really, explain why the president hates the troops. But with Joe Biden, when you finally do get a reporter willing to go out on a limb and ask him the tough question, everyone else is like, ooh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get the wrath of Joe Biden. I don't want him to get mad at me. I want him to win. I don't want to put him in a bad situation. I want him to win. That's what we're dealing with here, folks. These aren't honest people. And that's why I do partially agree when President Trump says that the fake news, not all the media, but the fake news, the media that spreads fake stories or deliberately sits on stories because they know it would hurt the Democrats, the fake news is the enemy of the people. Because there are people in powerful positions in media that don't want voters to know about this because they know that if the voters learn, Joe Biden will sink like a rock. And this is the heart of the whole impeachment Remember when all Donald Trump said to the Ukrainian prime minister or president, whichever it was, he said, listen, my people tell me that Joe Biden was into some really nasty stuff in Ukraine. I'd like you to work with the attorney general and look into it. That's all Donald Trump said. He said, it sounds terrible to me. And they impeached him over it. Well, now the interim report actually, you know what? No one can read that Hunter Biden is collecting $3.5 million from the wife of the former mayor of Moscow, obviously an entrenched Russian oligarch. $3.5 million wire transfer, paying money out to people connected to prostitution and human trafficking rings, right? That Joe Biden was briefed before he actually admitted he knew about it. No one can say that there's no there anymore, which is why we're covering this today. We absolutely have to cover this again today. So again, I just posted the link in the Facebook comments. I pinned it. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to our YouTube page. We're close to 1,000 subscribers. Once that happens, we unlock more tools to monetize it, right? To more advertising tools. Please do subscribe. There's a link pinned in the comments of Facebook, the Facebook live stream. One click that link, and it'll say, do you want to subscribe? You just hit yes, and then you're done. So it's very, very easy. Please do that. So those are the two, right? We just went through two criminals. We got Mike Bloomberg. Well, actually, three criminals. We got Mike Bloomberg, we got Hunter Biden, and we got Joe Biden. I want to talk about what happened in Louisville. And this might seem like it's a little bit disjointed, but I truly do believe that when it rains, it pours. And when you start uncovering criminality, you start looking elsewhere, you see more criminality. This is absolutely fits within this theme of Democrats committing crimes in plain sight and hoping you don't find out about it. Yesterday, a grand jury in Kentucky returned 3 charges against one of the officers involved in the warrant execution that led to a woman named Breonna Taylor being killed. They released 3 charges. None of them were murder. They all basically were wanton disregard for human life. It's like wanton endangerment. And the reason for that was that the cops apparently, they knocked on the door, the grand jury heard testimony, and they concluded that yes, they did announce themselves as police. Then one of the individuals, apparently Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, shot at the officers through the door. Right? And this is why I know that this is completely bogus. This idea that they didn't knock, that they didn't announce themselves as police. Of course they announced themselves as police, because immediately after they did, someone inside the apartment shot at them. Right? You don't just shoot anyone who knocks on your door. But if you're a drug dealer, if you're involved in criminal activity, and you hear there's police at the door, yeah, it makes at least a little bit more sense that he would do that. Not saying it's a good thing to do, but at least logically I can understand it. I cannot logically understand why someone would shoot at someone knocking on the door if they didn't present themselves as police. You don't just do that. You don't just shoot people at your door. So the 3 charges that came down from the grand jury were for wanton endangerment of human life. I probably got the exact name wrong, but they're technically felonies, and that's because one officer returned fire through the door. So they knocked on the door, they presented themselves as knock, 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 police, open up. They take a round in their direction. He fires back 3 shots back through the door. They're saying that because he didn't know who was on the other side of the door, that was wanton endangerment of human life, because ultimately one of those rounds did hit Breonna Taylor. And it's unfortunate. And no one wants anyone to die in warrant executions like this. Of course not. But they didn't actually charge them with murder. They didn't charge them with manslaughter. They charged them simply for the act of firing a gun through a door without knowing who was sitting on the other side of the door. Which it brings up a very interesting dilemma. Democrats for weeks have been saying that Breonna Taylor was killed because she was black. That these were racist cops executing a no-knock raid, which we now know wasn't true. Just like hands up, don't shoot, the no-knock narrative was false. But we've been told that these were racist cops killing a black woman during a no-knock raid. Here's the dilemma. Breonna Taylor was not the subject of the warrant. I believe that the actual subject of the warrant wasn't even there at the time. How could police officers have killed her because she was black if the shot was fired through a closed door? Did I just blow your mind? How is no one talking about this? They're saying that the cops were racist. that they deliberately killed her for being black. But they're also saying that the cops are criminals because they shot through a door without seeing who was behind it. So how could they have killed a black woman knowing she was black if they fired indiscriminately through a closed door? It's not possible. Now you say, oh, well, I'm sure they just assumed she was black. Really? That's what we're on now? Or we're just going to assume that every drug dealer's girlfriend happens to be black? Really? They don't date any white girls? God, this is stupid. It doesn't make sense. It's a serious logical flaw in all of this. If you shoot through a door and it's closed and you're charged for indiscriminately firing, which, listen, they had the right to fire back. They absolutely did. If police take a round incoming, they have the right to send rounds downrange at the person who just shot them. But they don't have the right just to start indiscriminately firing. They have to aim at the target and they can shoot the target. They can't just fire through a closed door. And I think it's fair. I don't think he should be charged for it. I think that in the heat of the moment, I could understand why if rounds start coming through a door, police would start firing back. But the argument that they're being charged for killing someone through a door because they didn't actually see who was on the other side. And listen, that's one of the ultimate rules of gun safety, right? We're all taught this when we have the gun classes. Treat every gun like it's loaded. Keep your finger off the trigger. Don't point your gun at anything unless you're ready to destroy it. And then the fourth one, be sure of what's in front of and behind your target. That's one of the rules of gun safety. So yeah, technically these cops violated that basic rule of gun safety. But in that heat of the moment, is it fair to charge them with felonies after they've just been shot through a door executing a warrant? Is it fair? I don't know. It's an interesting dilemma. But how could they be accused of killing someone because they're black, because they fired through a door, or fired through a wall, or fired through some object that made it impossible to know who was on the other side? It's not possible. Not possible at all. But no doubt the leftists rioted anyway. And I'm really glad that we caught this. We didn't catch it. Someone else caught it. It's made the rounds already on the internet. Field reporters, citizen journalists, caught a U-Haul truck delivering riot gear to the peaceful protesters. Let's go ahead and play cut 7.
Hey, somebody with me on this. Let's go. Let's go, man. Lighten it up. Hey, get this out, bro. Woo, woo, woo.
So that is a video of them handing out protest signs, wooden shields with BLM logos on it, BLM writings on it, handing it out to people. So why don't we track down who did it? And I know that there are some citizen journalists who tracked down the U-Haul. I believe that something leaked out of U-Haul showing the alleged woman who rented it. We're not going to put her face on the podcast today. I don't want to be accused of doxing. A lot of times those things can be wrong, but it really isn't hard to find this out. That truck has a license plate. It has a rental agreement. It has a serial number. It's very easy to find out who was distributing riot shields to peaceful protesters, right? There's an organization to all of this. We've been saying this for months. These aren't just spontaneous grassroots protests. These are people going state to state and agitating, right? Handing out water bottles, not for people to drink, but so they can throw them at officers. Shields, so that they can deflect officers' blows. Umbrellas. Why do they hand out umbrellas? Because umbrellas, when you actually open them up, they can deflect tear gas canisters, right? So that's why you see these rioters holding umbrellas. Kathy says that she heard that truck was rented by a Soros employee. Yes, we heard the same thing. We're not going to show her name or her picture on the show. I haven't been able to confirm it, and I'm sure that other people have confirmed it. I just don't feel comfortable doing it until I know for sure. But it is out there. You can see it. There's plenty of blogs that reported someone called U-Haul. Someone apparently called her pretending to be U-Haul. And apparently she is connected to a Soros-funded organization. But, oh, nope, sorry. Fox News says we're not allowed to talk about George Soros. I mean, this is how crazy this stuff is. But I want to play some more cuts of what we saw in in Louisville. Let's put up cut 8. These are rioters just sitting on police cars. That's criminal. Why aren't they being charged? That guy just hit a police car. This is completely illegal. He's Instagramming. He's treating this like it's a rap video. I mean, all of them. Why aren't they all being charged? And let's go here. These are peaceful protesters coming upon a restaurant that had outdoor patio furniture. Leave a comment in the comment section. Do you think that the rioters were peaceful in their handling of this patio furniture? Or do you think they tried to destroy the patio furniture? Leave a comment in the comment section. I'm curious. Do you think that these rioters came upon this outdoor eatery and said, you know what? These are people that had nothing to do with Breonna Taylor. We're going to leave these people alone. Or do you think they tried to destroy everything? Leave a comment in the comment section and let me know what you think. I'm going to give it 5 seconds and then I'm going to play the clip. All right, let's play cut 9. Oh, so peaceful. They're flipping tables, flipping chairs, destroying the sign, destroying the umbrella. So anyone who in the comment section predicted that they were going to destroy the patio furniture, you are the winners. I mean, it's not really a fair contest. Of course they destroyed the patio furniture, because don't you know that eatery was responsible for Breonna Taylor's death? Don't you know that? They're part of white supremacy? Don't you know that? Don't you know that that patio furniture was intimately involved? The patio furniture killed Breonna Taylor? Don't you know that? I mean, it's stupid, folks. This is what we're led to believe. And the media reported these as peaceful protests. Okay, mostly peaceful protests. Here is the clip that Fox News and everyone was playing last night. This is the moment you can hear a police officer being shot. You can't see it. We would never play that. But you can hear the shots that rang out that ultimately struck 2 police officers last night. Let's go ahead and play cut 10.
Ready to come from everywhere else. Here they come. Oh, they shot guns at them. Oh, shit. They're shooting guns at them. Real guns. Shit. They're blasting at the police.
Amazing. So what you hear there is you hear the reports from the distance, from the police line. Apparently, that sounded like tear gas or rubber bullets. It didn't sound like gunshots. They were much deeper. You can tell when you listen. You can tell the difference between actual live ammunition fired or tear gas canisters or rubber bullets, or like they have a different report to them. But then you can also hear rounds going back at the police, and you can tell. I'm wearing headphones, so it's coming in stereo. I can hear my right ear and my left ear. It's obvious that there are 2 different shooters. That was the moment that peaceful protesters decide to shoot at police. And let's go ahead and play this. This is a clip of the moment that police officers realize that there are officers down. Again, it doesn't show officers down, I don't believe. It's just, we can hear it coming out over the radio on this clip. So let's go ahead and play cut 11. So those are the gunshots we just heard. Police are now scattering because they realize actual shots are being fired.
Shots fired.
Good? Good. You all good?
Good.
So right now they're waiting to figure out what just happened. And the call should be coming out over the radio shortly. Officer down.
Right there. Officer down, right there. Officer down?
Yes. Yes. Okay. What do you want to do? Right here. Right here.
All right, let's cut it. I wanted to just let everyone know. We couldn't see the officer in that clip. We wouldn't want to show that. Apparently, both officers are going to survive and make a recovery. One, right before we came on, I believe I heard that he's been released. They expect both of them to make a full recovery, which is great news. But I wanted to show that because you can see that the officers, their entire body language changes. You can tell with the way the officer wearing that, I believe it's a woman based on how you can hear her voice, that body camera, that it just, as soon as the shots are fired, they all start running, they run for cover, they assess the situation, realize there's an officer down, they put it out over the radio, and then they go and help the officers. Just want to play that in case anyone doubted that police officers were actually shot. And Zach says that is graphic. The video isn't graphic. We made sure not to include anything graphic on the video. But we did want to at least let you hear that you, and I don't think you meant, Zach, that it was graphic. We wanted to at least let everyone hear that this happened. Police officers were shot. An interesting other aspect to this is that yesterday, like in so many of these situations, there were armed conservatives, whether you want to call them concerned citizens, whether you call them militias, whether you want to call them business owners looking to make sure their whole block wasn't burned down like you saw in Kenosha or Minneapolis or Seattle. There were people out on the streets yesterday and last night with AR-15s and other rifles and body armor and helmets and all kitted up to defend their communities. And I want to talk about that because of the smears that they got. It was just too much. So let's go ahead and real quick, this is a quick clip. We'll play cut 12. Them walking down the street. Nothing really, they're not doing anything illegal. It's an open carry state. But they are there as a show of force, just in case anyone gets an idea that they're going to start shooting people, start destroying businesses. No one there wants to kill anyone. But just like we've seen in Kenosha, just like we saw in Minneapolis, there were armed citizens out there trying to prevent death and damage to property. I want to play this clip because Governor Beshear, Kentucky governor, Democrat, I believe, he went on CNN and complained about the militias, and he called them white supremacists, knowing absolutely nothing about these people, knowing absolutely nothing about their intentions or any of it, openly smeared them as white supremacists. Let's go ahead and play cut 13.
We saw images of civilians armed to the teeth on the streets of Louisville yesterday, vigilante groups, militias, whatever you want to call them, kind of self-appointed law enforcement. And I'm curious, as governor of Kentucky, do you see any place for groups like this in responding to protests?
I see no place for what are often white supremacy groups in our society in general. They've protested me. They hung me in effigy on our Capitol grounds. And them being in this situation with the ability to cause chaos if they choose to potentially turn something peaceful into something that is incredibly dangerous. They need to go home. They need to go home.
So where is his outrage over the allegedly George Soros-funded individual who brought in riot shields in a U-Haul truck? You don't hear him saying that they need to go home. You don't hear him saying that the peaceful protesters who just destroyed all that patio furniture in the outdoor dining area, you don't see him calling on them to go home. You don't. I'm sure he condemned it, but at least in that clip, you don't hear him saying that the people who shot the cops should go home. Right, the other people causing property damage and destruction, they shouldn't go home. He dials in on what he calls white supremacists, and is very, very strange. And yes, he is a Democrat, but he says they have no business there. And Mr. Producer, let's go ahead and put up on my screen again. We've covered this in the past. This is the federal statute dealing with the militia and the different classes of militia. That there are two different classes of militia under federal statute. Any able-bodied male between the ages of 17 and 45, and any female citizen who is a member of the National Guard are part of the United States militia. And there's two classes of militia. One, the organized militia, which consists of the National Guard or the naval militia. And two, the unorganized militia, which consists of the members of the militia who are not members of the National Guard or naval militia. So that's everyone. If you're not in the National Guard and you're a man between the ages of 17 and 45, you're technically, by federal law, part of the militia. the unorganized militia, but the militia nonetheless. So him saying that you have no right to protect your community, the Constitution and federal statutes say that's wrong. I'm not sure if Kentucky has any law prohibiting people from gathering for the purpose of defending their communities. I doubt it does. But under federal statute and under the Constitution, you have the right to defend your communities. So when he says they have no place there, the founders and early American members of Congress saw differently. That in times of great distress, in times of great strife, when government officials are either complicit in the violence or unable or unwilling to stop it, then yes, that unorganized militia can be called up or can take matters into their own hands. That's the whole purpose of the Second Amendment. Not just to defend your home, right? Not just defend your car, defend your community. Not just when the government's unable to defend you, but against the government itself in some cases. So we can go ahead and take that off the screen. I just wanted to show that again. We've talked about that when we were talking about Kyle Rittenhouse. I want to bring it up again because I think it is important to talk about in the context of what the governor just said. And I want to show this video because he's labeling them as white supremacists and the like. Here's a video of some of these militia individuals meeting with cops and getting a lay of the land and having the cop tell them where they can and cannot go. Something that the actual peaceful protesters never bothered to do. So let's go ahead and play cut 14.
You go down there if you choose to. There's a lot of grassy area along the north side of the road. Right? And I kind of set that apart as those people who want to come down today and exercise their Second Amendment rights or their First Amendment rights.
That's not what we're here for. That's why we're sitting over here.
If you choose to come down there will probably be people on that north side of Churchill Downs. I'm going to watch over and protect everybody. That's what I do, right? And so just be prepared. There's liable to, later on today, there's liable to be several hundred, several thousand people in there. Don't kind of try and come on Central. Don't try to take that south sidewalk. We'll have problems. I don't want any of that kind of stuff.
We're not planning on doing that. We're not even planning. We're not here for that angry Viking group. We ain't here for NFAC. We're here for y'all. We're just here on standby. We're not out there in that rally. Don't want to be in that rally because last time we kind of got shoved like we were counter protesters, and that's not what we do. So.
Okay. All right.
And all my people have orange on them, so we'll all be together. So.
Okay. I just want to make sure you knew that. Don't try and come in those areas because I'm going to
arrest
anybody that tries to come in there.
You got them two areas down packed.
I mean, cut it there. So I just want to play that because they're being smeared as white supremacists trying to stop the protest. And that's literally a video of those people meeting with the cop, explain that, no, we're not here for the protesters. We're here just in case stuff starts going down and we need to help you guys. Police. They're not here to start trouble with the protesters. So Governor Beshear is just lying. He's saying that, oh, they're there to agitate and to cause violence. It's just not true. It's completely not true. And I'm really getting tired of those smears because I know plenty of people who train and are members of not like organized militias, but they're in email lists, they're in text lists where if like I live in Texas, when violent rioters were threatening to burn down the Alamo, I got a notification. Actually, my wife got the notification, strangely enough. Other people got notifications to go and defend the Alamo. So there's lots of like email alerts, text alerts, very loosely organized, some more organized than others. But it doesn't make them all white supremacists. This idea that if you go out to try and defend your community or protect the cops, you're a white supremacist. I mean, listen, there's no doubt that white supremacy exists. There are people who are white supremacists. But when you just describe anyone who happens to oppose your protest or your riot as a white supremacist, you belittle the term. You belittle the term so much. So it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. But they're going to keep spreading the lies. Before we go with the podcast, I'm going to talk about one more bit of news, which I'm happy about. Let's go ahead and put up image 4. John Durham is investigating the Mueller probe and the DOJ for their handling of the Trump-Russia investigation. But John Durham has also convinced a grand jury to issue a subpoena against the Clinton Foundation. Now, we don't know how that subpoena has gone. We don't know if that's uncovered any other evidence of criminality. We don't know. We do know, though, that he had impaneled a grand jury. The grand jury saw evidence and saw enough evidence of criminal acts to justify the issuing of a subpoena to the Clinton Foundation. Very interesting, because just like Joe Biden said, not a hint of criminality in Hunter or Joe Biden. And obviously, you look into it even a little bit, you're like, whoa, that's a lot of criminality. That's a similar thing that we've heard for years. Oh, no, there's nothing wrong with the Clinton Foundation. Nothing to see here. Don't even look at it. And then John Durham looks at it, impanels the grand jury, and a jury of our peers in, I believe it's the District of Columbia. It might have been a different district. A jury of our peers saw the same evidence, said, yeah, that's enough for a subpoena. It just goes to show that this argument that we always hear from leftists, that there's nothing to see here, there's no evidence of criminality, it just shows that it's just not true. It's just not true at all. So I want to just round it out. We have all these different criminal acts, right? We had Michael Bloomberg, we have Hunter Biden, we have Joe Biden, we have whoever's arming these rioters, we have the rioters themselves, right? And then we have the Clinton Foundation, all in the span of, 48 hours? Amazing. And the ultimate question is, why have none of these people been arrested? Apparently, they caught the guy who shot the cops in Louisville. Great. But why isn't Hunter Biden behind bars? Well, because he's the son of a very powerful daddy. Why isn't anyone from the Clinton Foundation behind bars, right? Why isn't Michael Bloomberg? We talked about this at the start. 32,000 counts of third-degree felonies carry a maximum combined penalty of 160,000 years behind bars. That's crazy. 32,000 instances of illegally paying someone to vote. Why aren't they behind bars? And if this is what we catch, imagine how much we don't catch. I mean, they love to say that Donald Trump and all of his cronies are criminals, but everywhere we look, it's Democrats. And it's amazing that the mainstream media isn't covering it. Well, that's going to be it for this edition of the podcast. If you like the podcast, please do subscribe to the audio version as well. It's great that you watch it live, but also subscribe to the audio version. The best way to do that is if you have an iPhone, to do so on Apple Podcasts. There's a link in the description to do so. We hit the number 125 most popular political podcasts in America. We want to get into the top 100. So the only way we do that is by you subscribing to our podcast and by you leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. So please do that. You can also, if you don't have an iPhone, you can find us on Google Play. You can find us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Podbean. We're also here on YouTube and Facebook, so subscribe to our YouTube pages and our Facebook pages as well if you haven't already. There's also a link in the description to subscribe to our email newsletter. If we get taken down off the air by any of these big tech companies, that's how we're going to rally people to explain how we're going to stay on the air and continue fighting back. We're also on Parler. Follow us at Conservative Daily on Parler, and we'll be happy to follow you back. I think I hit up everything. So again, my name is Max McGuire. Joe Otto is out today, so it's me solo. Thanks for listening. And remember that the fight to take back our country clearly isn't over, but the only way we win is if we all stand up and fight together.